Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Don Lomo with Key Performance Ideas, and I would like to welcome you to our webinar, On-Premise Migration to Oracle PBCS or EPBCS. Today's webinar will be presented by Yousef Saead. Yousef is an Oracle Essbase and Oracle Planning and Budgeting Certified Specialist with experience in financial modeling, application development, data loading, validation, and automation. He has guided customers across a variety of industries in their implementation of successful planning, budgeting, and reporting solutions. Yousef, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Greg. Thank you. Today I'm going to be talking about the migration from on-prem into PBCS. I'm going to be introducing PBCS and EPBCS, as well as go over a couple of case studies and different types of migration and some simplified steps that we went through with a subject company. Some limitations that we went through, as well as security and data integration and the capabilities we have with the automation and how we use that to help our implementation, help the migration. So I'm going to introduce PBCS to you. PBCS is a software as a service that's provided by Oracle. It provides flexible financial planning and budgeting with multiple access points, so you can access it through a prominent browser as well as your Excel spreadsheets, Microsoft Excel using a add-in called SmartView. It includes all the existing reporting and data management features that we have in on-prem. So if you have any integrations in on-prem with data management or with FDME, we can move those into the cloud. It comes with 3 BSO cubes and 3 ASO cubes with an additional ASO consolidation cube, which is usually leveraged as a reporting cube. The multiple benefits that we can see from PBCS, the clear benefits is its lower IT costs. There's no maintenance to PBCS or minimal maintenance compared to on-prem in terms of server maintenance and infrastructure. There's no patching, no upgrades, and no upfront costs. So it reduces your enterprise IT costs because you don't have to maintain any of the servers, and therefore your users can focus mainly on forecasting and budgeting that's going on in their daily jobs. It also provides much faster calculations, which I'll go through in a little bit. So I wanted to talk about the difference between EPBCS and PBCS. It's very simple because it's given to you with one instance, so you can access PBCS and EPBCS at one instance. Think of EPBCS as an add-in to PBCS. It's just out-of-the-box modules and frameworks that come out of the box instead of having to build them in PBCS. So instead of building them from scratch, we would be configuring EPBCS modules that are sitting on top of PBCS. So just wanted to introduce that so you have a clear idea of what that is. So a couple of case studies. I'm going to start with AAR. They moved their from spreadsheets to PBCS, directly to PBCS to the cloud. They didn't have on-prem before that, so they leveraged the cloud directly. So AAR is a leading provider for aviation services. They had issues with multiple mergers and acquisitions that led to their fragmented chart of accounts. So with the multiple acquisitions and mergers, it was very hard for them to forecast and budget in a timely manner, just because of the different chart of accounts that they were working with, instead of having one point of contact. So it requires high maintenance, as you can imagine, which took from the original user's business functions, and instead of focusing on their financial planning, they were directing their attention to maintaining the on-prem application. So you can see how that was a big waste of both time, energy, and resources. So finally, their custom integrations needed patching on an ongoing basis, which is why the maintenance costs were very high as well. So we helped AAR in choosing PBCS to standardize their financial planning and forecasting and reporting into one place for all the entities involved. So we had one chart of accounts reported using one chart of accounts, as well as planned and forecasted the same way. So that means that they saved a lot of time on retiring all their servers and the servers that were used to maintain their on-prem applications, and again had users use their time more efficiently into innovating in their forecasts and budgets. In addition to that, many more features were leveraged because users were not afraid to explore different options in the application. They weren't afraid now because they were previously afraid to break the process. So they started leveraging Smart View reports through dashboards to show daily visibility into their numbers. They also automated their metadata and data loading process. So that provided flexibility into their plan to plan on a higher level, but also maintained a lower level of granularity. So multiple benefits achieved with AR. We helped AR achieve these, especially with the calculation times from 20 minutes down to 15 seconds. So all the underlying calcs in the forms were running much faster and much more efficiently. They now had more visibility into their data and therefore the granularity level. So they were able to forecast budget in a much more timely manner, but also in a much lower level of granularity. So AR had several cubes and had several different hierarchies to maintain, and we also fixed that with PBCS by having one point of contact with both your ASO hierarchies and your BSO hierarchies. You can see how that would save a lot of time in terms of maintaining one hierarchy and enabling or disabling certain dimensions in one cube and not in another. So another case study that I'd like to talk about is IDT. IDT moved from their on-prem environment, planning environment to EPBCS, straight to EPBCS. So IDT sells semiconductor solutions worldwide. They were reliant on spreadsheets for expense planning and had issues with headcount planning. As you can imagine, they had 50 different entities and couldn't forecast effectively and in any timely manner. So they clearly needed a forecast solution for forecasting full employee expenses. These numbers were instantly pushed to the underlying GL accounts as well. So as these calculations were being run, the final output was being pushed to the GL accounts as needed. So we at Key Performance Ideas implemented a EPBCS solution with the workforce planning module. The different employee types had different logic for their calculations. So we had configured workforce to work with different employee types or different codes that employees had specifically related to their bonus and other related expenses, such as Social Security or any other employee-related expenses that were tailored to specific departments or employees as a whole. They were now able to report on employee-level data, which never previously was reported on. They added strong security for users that shielded employee salaries, salary details as well. So the data that users were not supposed to be looking at or not supposed to be seeing was shielded by the security that we used with PBCS in conjunction. So Key Performance Ideas helped IDT in achieving these benefits, especially with implementing this world-class solution that's out of the box called Workforce, provided by EPBCS. I'll be talking about Workforce and a little bit more about that later. So this was tailored to their specific employee types, as I mentioned, and we created the ability to control expense drivers and change the forecast to mimic these or to reflect these different assumptions that were changed initially. So we were able to use the source system extracts for loading data as opposed to templates, and that was a big time saver since IDT didn't need to manipulate any of the extracts that were coming out of their source applications. So we used data management to do that, and again, a little bit more about data management later and how we use that in our implementation. So now that we've talked about PBCS and some proven case studies, let's back up into how these implementations were approached. From here on out, I'll be using a subject company that we worked with specifically in a migration project similar to both the case studies that I've mentioned. I'll talk a little bit about the high-level action items that we focused on in that specific implementation. So the focus was more on a move then improve approach. So because the application was relatively simple, we moved and improved at the same time into the cloud, as opposed to moving everything first and then trying to improve on the things that were a little bit more complex, because having too many variables move in at the same time would make the process that much harder and longer to perform. So since the application is already being moved to a clean canvas, why not clean it up, right? So this is the time to retire the data you don't need, the forms you don't need, the reports, and some cell level security you want to add or retire. So we usually have our clients look into their processes once more, and we help them identify what processes can be leveraged and which ones can be used more efficiently. So from here, we can start by creating the application, as I'll show you later on. We then go back to our on-prem environment and save a snapshot of the shell. And when I say shell, I mean everything but the data. And in our case, the biggest improvement with this client was moving dimensions that were previously defined as attributes to common dimensions. So our subject company had market and city previously assigned to entities, and we helped them move these market and city attributes into becoming common dimensions as their reporting requirements changed. Keep in mind, we used two different tools to export dimension members. From an ASO perspective, we used the LTM file export and then revised that. And from a BSO perspective, we used the EPM copy utility. Some of you might know if you use the EPM copy utility, you're not able to export ASO in the format that we needed for the cloud. So keep in mind, we also, this is very important, where we had to validate using after every step. So always use a stepwise approach. Don't try to do everything at once. As I mentioned, we used a move and improve approach just because the complexity of the app wasn't affecting us much. But if the application is relatively complex and has a lot of rules and different forms that we are working with, different underlying models, we use a different approach, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Instead of a move and improve, it would be a lift and shift, quote unquote. So the first step in any project is to assess the scope of the project. So two different approaches we're taking. In a lift and shift, as I explained, it would be a lot easier to do that when the complexity of the application. It's relatively easier to do a lift and shift because the application is a lot more complex. But with a relatively simpler application, we would use a move and improve, where we would improve as we move the application to the cloud. So just different kind of methodologies that we use depending on the complexity of the application. So what is your on-prem version? This is important because we note that because the calculations need to be business rules in order for them to work in PBCS. They cannot be anything but business rules, and if we are doing that, if they're not business rules, we have to have a lot of manipulation and vast editing of these rules to change them into calculation scripts or business rules. SA scripts don't work, as some of you might know, and the logic needs to be rewritten in calculation script format, which was my first point. So after that, we look at some of the data integrations. What kind of imports, what kind of exports do we have? Do we have any metadata automation? Do we have any data automation? And we assess what kind of scope is needed for that. So what kind of existing security do we have here? In most cases, with our clients, we find that this is a part that's been previously ignored and becomes a very tedious job to move all the security aspects, especially when you have 250 plus users like our subject company did. So we made sure that made sure we retired the security that wasn't needed and kept the security that was needed, as it is a very tedious process to move security without having to fix the security initially or retire the initial security. So as I mentioned, we used the same instance for EPBCS as PBCS, and I'll show you later on that you can convert PBCS to EPBCS with a click of a button, and then you can configure the different frameworks or different modules that we have here. So the projects module is essentially a framework that lets employees drive their projects, their expenses that are related to these projects while tracking asset-related expenses and project revenues. Financials is a framework that allows the integration of the different financial statements with one another. So any changes in your income statement will update both the balance sheet and the cash flow statements. After that, we have our workforce module where HR expense planning and employee analytics framework is provided, where clients are able to forecast and budget their headcount from a high-level perspective as well as a lower-level perspective, depending on how many entities we have and what kind of requirements are needed. The capital asset module utilizes asset amortization and depreciation for different assets, as well as provides planning improvements and retirements and transfers for these different assets as well. Finally, the strategic modeling framework is mainly for long-term planning, so what-if analysis and more so treasury initiatives, and it can also be used as a tool for stress testing, since it does provide a very strong what-if analysis in the scenarios provided. So I provided this small table here to show you the difference in complexity, as I mentioned, with the lift and shift and the move and improve. A higher level of complexity application, we use the lift and shift, and we approach it in a way where we move it first to PBCS, and then we move it to the prod environment, which is EPBCS, basically by converting PBCS into EPBCS after we have a valid application using a stepwise approach, as I explained. And after that, we configure the different modules in EPBCS as needed. In a lower level complexity environment, we just move it and improve at the same time, where we move it straight to EPBCS and then configure these modules after validation. Keep in mind to always set up a tracker sheet spreadsheet where I have, we use this specifically for tracking all of the artifacts that we move to PBCS, including forms, metadata, different dimensions, different smart lists, substitution variables, and so forth. I won't go through the whole list, but you get the point. Keeping a set up tracker spreadsheet is helped a lot with the process, because if you get stuck on something, you can either skip it or you know exactly where you are stuck on, and just keeping the ball rolling sometimes is very helpful. So I'd like to go through creating the application. I'll show you a couple of slides of how the application is created. Before any movements occur from on-prem to PBCS, we need to make sure that our plan types have the same names as the on-prem environment. So if that's not the case, what we did was we went through and we changed the names in the XML file snapshots that were exported in the migration. So you must also create existent dimensions and then add to them in the same way that we do create plan types. The names have to be the same, but also with the dimensions, it's also the same. And any new dimensions, custom dimensions in our case were the two attributes for market and city were added as dimensions rather than attributes at this point. So we started the import process of artifacts after that, importing forms, reports, and so forth. We used a tool called data management, as I've mentioned, to import the data from import the data after the metadata has been validated. So we had to make sure that after the metadata has been validated and all the members are in, we could start loading data, and we wouldn't have any kickouts after that, just to make sure we don't have the kickouts. We went through user acceptance testing after that to make sure it's exactly the data is validated and is exactly matching the existing reports that we have in on-prem. After that, we migrated from test to production, and we configured the different modules as I explained previously. So here are a couple of slides that I want to go through in terms of creating the application. I want to show you the simplicity of it. So you can use any prominent browser like Chrome, Explorer, or Firefox. Oracle does recommend Firefox as it has the best run times. So you can see that once you have your instance, you can log on and go to the application that you want to create. In our case, it's going to be a planning and budgeting application, and it's going to be a standard application, not an enterprise application, because we're doing a move then improve with our subject company where we were doing a lift and shift. So we're moving to standard application, and then we're shifting that to a enterprise application, and then we're configuring the workforce module or the different modules that you want to configure. So once you create your application or hit the standard button, it will ask you multiple, it'll ask you to what kind of planning frequencies you want to work with. Is it a monthly planning frequency? What's your start and end year? What's your weekly distribution, and is it a rolling forecast or not? A lot of these options you see here cannot be, you cannot go back and change these. So once you have them set from here, you would have to delete your application in order for you to change these options. So just make sure that you know what you're heading for here before changing these properties and creating your application. You can see that you can name the input cube as well. So the name of the input cube cannot be changed after it is named here. So this is where we created the names that mimic the on-prem environment plan type names. So from here we created the application, and after that we, as I've mentioned, enabled EPBCS, and as you can see here, you can configure any of the frameworks that I've explained previously, the different modules that we have with EPBCS. So we got to the point where we have our plan types and dimensions ready. We've set up the shell. We don't have data there yet. So after creating these different plan types, we can also start loading the data now. And at this point, because we had new dimensions that were not in on-prem, we needed new mappings to import from our data. And we used data management to do that using a multi-dimensional mapping to map the different attribute dimensions to their perspective points of view from a common dimension perspective. As you can see, it's a multi-dimension mapping where we have, for example, I put an example here for a specific location that if we have an airport in our target value of market, it will automatically put it in our entity location 100 and so forth. So we leveraged that, and that was very helpful in terms of manipulating our data without having to open the different templates and manipulate them manually. From here, we also imported the rest of the artifacts as shown. We went through all the business rules, forms, and reports one at a time and validated that they did work. Some of the artifacts that we went through are provided on this page or on this PowerPoint, where we had the business rules, variables, rule sets, menus, and so forth. I incorporated the forms, the create the folders first in forms, so we created the folders first as well before we had to import the simple forms and the composite forms for us to have a successful migration. So oftentimes we find ourselves stuck or frustrated for some reason because of some errors. So just make sure you refresh the database after loading each dimension or metadata artifact. Validate it after every step, so make sure you use the stepwise approach that I've discussed earlier. Save a snapshot when progressing through your migration, just so you don't have to do any rework. Loading all at once will give you a big headache, and especially if there's an issue, you won't know what the issue was, since you know, when you're troubleshooting, there are too many moving variables, so it's hard to pinpoint what went wrong. So if you can't identify the issue, I think you would have to go back, and that's what causes us the frustration and sometimes us being stuck at some point. So there are many options to import your metadata. As I've explained, there's a Smart View option with the Excel spreadsheets, as well as Microsoft Office Suite. So we have that Smart View add-on to the Microsoft Office Suite, where you can access your database using PowerPoint or Excel or Word and so forth. So we can also, we generally leverage the import metadata tool in our subject company migration here, where we had a format that was very similar to this screen here, where we had a scenario, our parent members right next to our child members, and had our different properties in the different columns. So this is actually a file that was exported from on-prem and then manipulated in a way where PBCS can process it. So this isn't the complete list of issues that we uncovered, but some of the issues that we did uncover were the no year member, which was not created with the application. Because it wasn't created, we had to go back and create that, and you will find that would be an issue once you try loading data. So we also had an issue with the year versus years naming convention. So we changed that to match the data files given, where one was year and the other was years. So we just made sure that we changed that dimension name rather than change our data. So there was no one place to modify all the hierarchies in all the cubes. So aliases and members of the same name needed to be changed, and we did that by adding a suffix or prefix to the member name or alias as needed. Finally, with member formulas, there's no way around this, but we had to validate each and every member formula and make sure that all of them worked after we migrated them and moved all the metadata into PBCS. With forms, we had one issue that fixed every form we had migrated, so we were fortunate to find a way to fix that issue. That was the plan type association. So as some of you might know, you can't edit form associations with plan types after they've been created. So we had to edit the snapshot to fix for this error. So the XML files that we exported using LCM and on-prem were edited to reflect the different plan types as shown here, where you have 1 for 1 and 2 for 4 and 3 for 8. So in the cloud, it was cube 3 was actually 8, and on-prem cube 3 was cube 3. So we then tested for the number of blocks, another issue that we had with forms. So we opened every form and tested the blocks issue, where it would show the error that we could see here. There's a limit on how many blocks we can show in one page in the cloud. So to solve for this, we would either split the form into multiple forms, or we retired the form and did a process improvement to create a better form. So those issues were the main issues we faced with forms and the general migration of that. So onto reports. Unlike any of the other artifacts, reports were exported and imported from the repository as opposed to using snapshot with LCM or migration. We made sure to change the application name from the XML repository file before importing it, just to make sure that the forms or the reports would open because they're associated to the correct plan types, just like we did with forms with the 1 and 3 and 2 and 8 and so forth. Some reports had different database connections as well as member names that needed to be updated as new plan types were added. So the different plan types that we had, the new ones had to be updated in the new reports because in on-prem the plan type simply just didn't exist. So we updated that, as well as did some validations to dynamic formulas in the reports. We just made sure that all of these worked as designed, and those were the main issues that we faced with the reports. On to data integration. We use a tool, I know I said data management. I've been mentioning data management a lot. So it's a tool that allows users to extract, transform, and load data and metadata onto the cloud. It allows users to load data from separate sources as well as map data to provide the flexibility into what the source file you want to look like. So we have flexibility in changing the mappings and changing the way columns look and the way different rows are loaded just by using data management without having to manipulate the files that we are given from the source application. It also allows for data movements between different plan types on the cloud. This load process can be fully automated if need be as well, using a utility called EPM Automate, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So in the context of the subject company I referred to earlier, we changed their ODI process to produce a flat file from the cloud to absorb. So we simply did a reprocess of what the flat file looked like, and we processed it in the cloud using data management. And we scoped for phase 2 to have an automation for the different metadata files, and then loading the data after that, making a error-proof process because we would always have metadata loaded before the data. So finally, we'd have the automation capabilities that I've been explaining. We use EPM Automate utility that allows us to remotely perform these tasks of importing, exporting data, both data and metadata, refresh the application, run business rules, and so forth. So you can imagine that you can use these in sequence. So we provide sequences, for example, to clear the data, load the new metadata, and then refresh the metadata or the application to have a error-proof process here, which is mainly the use of automation. So we don't have any manual work, and we leverage that to the best. Finally, with security, it's very easy to add members individually, but we had 250 members with different security access controls to them. So we use the import function or import box, as you can see on the top right next to the add button, where we imported a CSV file that added all the users at once with the different roles that are associated with them. As you can see, the import button is shown here as well. So unlike all the other artifacts as well, so this wasn't needed. We didn't need to change any of the XML or edit any of the XML files. It was a extract from a snapshot in on-prem and loaded onto PBCS with the different cell level securities. So we imported the groups first, but then we also imported cell level security using migration from on-prem. If the test was successful, so let me back up. So we created different users, and we created different user access requirements for these in different groups. So if the test was successful for the different users here, we continued to import the rest of the security just to go back to the point where make sure you validate every step. So we didn't try to import all of the security at once and then try to test it, but we tested a couple of users, make sure those worked, tested another 5 or 10, and make sure those worked until we were positive that everything was moving the way we wanted to move, and the access controls were correct. So good news is that you never have to touch the XML file with security. I'd like to finalize with some considerations that we had with the cloud, just some considerations that you should be thinking about. So the cloud has 150 gigabytes of storage and space per instance. There's only 1 day of backup that's out of the box, but that can be solved for by creating a rolling backup from an automation script using EPM Automate. There's a limit to 20 dimensions in the cloud, and the number of potential cells and forms is limited as well. As I showed you, there was an error that showed up for the number of blocks. So just keep in mind there is a limit for the number of blocks that are shown per UI. We fixed that by either separating one form into several or leveraged process improvements to create better forms. I do want to mention Smart Push, which allows the data to move from one cube to another only from with a hit of a button from a form. So if you hit save, that has a Smart Push functionality on it from one form, and you want to push that data instantly to your consolidation cube, ASO consolidation cube, you're able to do that in the cloud. With reports, some formulas are not valid in the cloud, so just make sure you look at that list before you use the formulas that were leveraged previously in on-prem. There's no EPMA in the cloud. There's a new tool called the Dimension Editor, which is equivalent to that. There's no FDM or FDME. There's no EAS, and the equivalent to that on the cloud is data management. So all the features you see in these two or all the features you see in FDME are in data management, but there wasn't a need for EAS because there was only one point of contact with all of the hierarchies. So we also used the use of metadata import process. There's no outline load utility, so we used the import process that I showed you as well earlier, and we also leveraged EPM Automate instead of a Maxell script that can be used in on-prem. We also have connections to planning cubes only on the cloud, so there's no S-based connection that can be solved for by having Oracle Analytics Cloud, which is a connection to any data source that you want to connect to. So I'd like to conclude with that, and that concludes my presentation. Greg, I'll turn the call back to you.
Great, thank you, Yousef. And thank you all for joining us today for our webinar, On-Premise Migration to Oracle PBCS or EPBCS. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Yousef's and my contact information are displayed on your screen. Thank you again, and have a great day.